So welcome back, and welcome to those who are here for the first time, and welcome back to those who were here last week. We're going to look at the body manifest the person, original solitude. So let us first begin with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the gift of life, the gift of creating us, male and female, and the gift of our bodies, that contact that we have with the world around us, that way that our person is manifest to the world and to each other. Help us to grow deeper in this understanding of who we are, especially those times when we certainly feel like we're foreigners in ourselves. Hold our hands gently as a good shepherd, Jesus, the incarnate Word, as we walk more deeply into these truths about ourselves and our deepest identity and our calling to be one with you and the Father and the Holy Spirit. Amen. The Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. So, theology of the body. Can anyone tell me anything you remember from last week? Without looking at your nose. No, that's right. Yeah. In the back.
This is probably very dark. I remember talking about Protestantism and the sex as a necessary evil perspective.
Oh, okay. Well, that was Puritanism specifically, but yeah. Okay, good. Yes.
That John Paul II was a student of
Phenomenology, yeah.
which is the same thing that Edith Stein taught.
Well,
I
yeah.
was absolutely thrilled.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so, it's a current of philosophy, of an approach to philosophy called phenomenology. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So here we are in delving into the first part. So last week we kind of just gave a big overview of what are we talking about with theology of the body. So remember, theology, the study of God's revelation of himself, of the body, how the body reveals those truths. What does the body reveal? It's something we don't perhaps think about a lot. So we're going to start jumping right in now into the content. There is, before I show all the outline, remember I talked about two basic parts in this big book. So the first part is the words of Christ in John Paul II's language. So we want to understand first who we are, anthropology, the study of who we are. And so he looks at words that Christ spoke to understand that. And then the second part is then the sacrament of marriage specifically. But as we build up, the sacrament we could even say, but what the body expresses. Why is that significant in the sacrament of marriage? So those are two basic parts in this book. Today we're going to look at part of part one. So we're in part one, there are three sections. So he uses the image of an altar piece, which is called a triptych, 3 parts, where if you've been to an altar, especially in Europe, this was common, you'd have 3 paintings above the altar that would depict scenes. So he says, imagine we're going to look at the altar up and we're going to discover who we are. We have 3 paintings. And he calls them original man, how we were in the beginning, before the fall. And then we have his terms, historical man, that middle section of our current situation after the fall. And then the E word, eschatological man. The eschatological man. So when we say man, obviously we mean mankind, man and woman. So when I use the word man, we mean human beings. Unless I specifically, by context, you understand we're talking about men. So we have those 3 parts. Today we're going to look at one section of that first part. So we have original man, and we're going to look at that. Just part of that section. What do we learn if we look at this first painting? In the beginning, what do we learn about who we are? Because to understand who we are, we can't just look at this moment in time. Just like your own life. Who are you? Well, just tell me about today and I'll know who you are. No. kind of need a little bit more of that. So knowing who we are, we need to look even beyond sin, because that's not original. Christopher West, I already kind of spoiled it, but he'll lead up to it and he'll say, we fill in the blank, and he'll mention a word, and you're supposed to fill in the blank. And so he finally gets to an original, and most people say sin. He's like, no, that's not original. Like, that came later. Original innocence. That's before sin. We can obviously call original sin, but that wasn't at the beginning. And so John Paul II wants to look at the beginning. So here's the outline. I'm just going to put it up on the screen to what we're going to look at today. And certainly not exhaustively. So you could obviously see this online if you wanted to find an outline. So, but you have, when Christ appeals to the beginning, what does he mean by the beginning? And a term he looks at and he discovers and he labels original solitude. So we're looking at that today. Next week, just flashing forward, we'll look at another term he has, original unity. So we're looking at the original man, first part, original solitude. So he's very thorough, right? He's not just going to say, oh, this is what we know about theology of the body. Here's your little handout. Go home and digest that. No, he's okay. Here's your handout, but now we're going to keep delving in and going deeper and deeper and deeper. For all those listening, no. So the context is this passage from Matthew 19, 3-8. And Pharisees came up to him, to Jesus, and tested him by asking, "Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause?" He answered, "Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate." They said to him, "Why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to send her away?" He said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning, it was not so." There's that passage. John Paul II is trying to discover who we are. He sees this dialogue between the Pharisees and Jesus about this question. Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? And they even reference, well, Moses allowed it. And then Jesus says, but in the beginning, it was not so. And he's quoting Genesis in two different passages that aren't side by side in Genesis. So he himself is connecting these two. Have you not read, male and female, God created them? And then therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife. There's something from the beginning that God had in mind. So what is meant by the beginning? So he looks at the first account of creation. We have Genesis 1 and we have Genesis 2, both giving accounts of creation, the creation story. And if you've read them before, you notice, well, there are differences in those. Well, they have different approaches. They actually have different contexts. The first is actually, and this is some just historical knowledge, the Elohist text would be Genesis 1. Elohe is the word for God. So that's why it's called the Elohist text. So God is referred to in that text. The term used is just a kind of interesting side note. Elohim is the plural. Gods. But the very interesting, this is just like if you're ever on Jeopardy and this comes up, you'll know this. So, the verb used in Genesis 1 is a singular verb, but the noun is plural, which is already kind of a foreshadowing of, wow, there's almost a revelation of the Trinity right from the beginning. And the very interesting thing is that was preserved throughout the ages. When the word of God was passed down, it's like me speaking grammatically incorrectly and then you kind of repeating that forever. And everyone's like, that's not how you say it. You don't say God's is something. You say God's are. But they kept saying God's is this. It's just very interesting how all throughout the centuries that was preserved. Anyway, that's your Jeopardy. If that ever comes up, you'll know. But Elohist tradition is the first account. It's inserted in the cycle of 7 days of the creation of the world, and it has, what John Paul II notices, an objective focus. And one thing about mankind, men and women in particular, we're made in the image and likeness of God. There's something objective about that. And the command, objective command, be fruitful and multiply. I'll be skipping some of the lines I have on here. Sorry, my brain's kind of shutting down, so if I go blank, just come slap me and I'll wake up again. And so he's really noticed, okay, in Genesis 1, there's something, the objective aspect, and we're going to learn from that. And he's just noticing things right now. He's kind of pointing out differences. In the second account of creation, which is Genesis 2, whenever you see, by the way, TOB, it's Theology of the Body, referencing the book I just showed you. And then if you see the numbers, 3:1, for example, that means all of Michael Waldstein, when he edited the text again, he numbered all the audiences, 1 through 160 or something. So that first number references the audience number. The second number references the paragraph. So it's just a reference. If you ever want to look at TOB 3:1, you go here and say, oh, TOB, and it actually has the headings at the top. Oh, here's 3:1, kind of like the Bible. It's like, oh, 3:1, in reference to Christ's words. So it's an easy way to cite the text. So whenever you see that number there, that's what it's referring to. So the second account is the Yahwehist text. Yahweh, with these 4 letters, the tetragram, is the covenantal name of God, the one that God revealed to Moses. And in fact, Jews will never say that word. In the scripture, it will always be replaced with Adonai, Lord. And in our Bibles too. And every time you see Lord in capital letters in the Bible, that's this name right here. In the Hebrew text, that's the letters that would be there. But they would see the letters, but they'd say Adonai. They wouldn't say this word. So it's actually more ancient than Genesis 1. And in John Paul II, as opposed to Genesis 1, where you have the objective focus of the human person, here you come into a subjective focus, something about our subjectivity, about I'm an individual with an interior or interiority. And he describes obviously more. We're going to look at some of that, and that's actually one of the key things we're looking at today, one of the aspects. So that was just a little bit of knowledge of the 2 accounts, the objective part of who we are, and then the subjective part. And in this subjective part, he wants to look at, well, what does that mean? What are some aspects we can draw out from that? Actually, both things, the objective and the subjective, and how can we learn about ourselves through those lenses? So I just mentioned this before. Jesus couples these 2 passages. Genesis 1:27, from the beginning God created male and female. And Genesis 2:24, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the 2 shall become one. So he's linking the beginning to the mystery of creation, and he's already showing that there's some type of boundary. Going quickly, I'm just highlighting the key ideas. This is John Paul II's thought process. I mentioned last time that the way John Paul II thinks through things, he's, okay, let's go deeper, 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 deeper. But that's actually more in a circle, because then if you're reading along, the next time he's like back at the beginning, what he just said the last time, it's like, wait, I thought we just said this. He did, but he wants to just keep unraveling and keep going deeper and deeper. So if you're ever feeling dizzy, that's probably why. And it's okay. So I'm just trying to highlight some key things. This is kind of his thought process, and he's leading you along. So in this, he's realizing that Jesus kind of brings us up to this boundary experience. So if we think of our 3 paintings, so original and historical, well, in between there's a boundary. Between the 2 panels, you could say, well, I could see, how do I get from historical, where we're at, to that experience? Jesus is pointing in the beginning, something before what you're experiencing now, there was something else. And we know that boundary was marked distinctly by when they ate from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So, okay, can we get before that eating of the fruit, let's go back there. The point I want to highlight here is the second line. It kind of begs the question, well, if I'm not in the original experience, how can I possibly know anything about that? right? We have lost our original innocence. But he's connecting it to this cry of the Spirit groaning inwardly for the redemption of our bodies. So in the very cry, there's already an indication, well, we are called to something different, and we come from something different. So this comment, when you see C2L, it's called To Love, the blue book that I see some of you have. This is some commentary on the ideas here. And one more little note I want to point out. We're going to talk about a lot of concepts perhaps that you're like, I'm not sure what you're talking about. There's a lot of information. I would suggest that's okay if you're not getting everything. So I'll be presenting a lot, and if it's for some people like, okay, I don't understand, like I'm not getting everything, I would suggest then just sit with it and take in the things that you're able to take in. So don't feel like, oh my gosh, I got to get everything down and I got to understand this completely. That's not the point. It's really to kind of, again, we're really looking at detailed, okay, let's hone in on this. Let's hone in on that. And along the way, we're going to discover aspects that perhaps resonate, things that challenge us, those types of reactions. I would say take note of that more than the content, more than you being able to afterwards go back and say, oh, I can explain this perfectly now. I understand theology of the body. No, if you can take in content too, that's great. But just kind of take the pressure off yourself. Or if there are things I say that, okay, I'm not sure I'm getting all of that. That's all right. Because even when I say it, I'm not getting it all either, right? When man experiences the world, so the two authors of Call to Love, they're reflecting on what we said last week. They're reflecting on, okay, our experience. When we reflect on our experience, we start to discover ourselves. So Jesus, when he's talking to the Pharisees and he's talking about, hey, let's look at the beginning, he's inviting us to then, well, start with your own experience, start to reflect, and you will start to discover things about who you are. So our experiences, though, can be clouded. So if we think of the Pharisees, when they're asking the question to Jesus, they're asking, is it possible to love another person forever? Like they ask, can you divorce your wife for whatever reason? Like, they're kind of implying, well, no. Yes, you can divorce them for whatever reason. Because is it possible to love a person forever? No, it's not. So, Jesus, can you give us a little way out? And he doesn't budge. He says, no, you can't get a way out. Now, doesn't mean it's easy, but that's when he's pointing back. In the beginning, it was not so. So we have clouded view of experiences, and this can happen in all sectors. When you are confronted with something, some truth of the faith, something that happens in life, and we realize, I don't like that answer. Like you might see, like Jesus' answer, and you're like, well, I don't like that answer. Okay, well, why don't you like that answer? There could be a hardness of heart. And an inability to grasp and express the meaning of experiences. Like we're all of us, including myself, we're all blinded. Like there's something we can't really see. We're going to eventually talk about purity. That comes much later. But John Paul II will say, well, how do we actually have a pure vision? How do we actually see and read our experiences correctly? Well, virtue and the gift of the Holy Spirit. But we also have to recognize we do have a certain hardness of heart. So this goes for what I just said before. If along the way you're starting like, ooh, I don't really like that. Or you're just struggling in general, it's okay. But take that, if that's an experience you're having right now, and take that and reflect upon it. Don't just reject what's being said because of that struggle. Like struggle's not a bad thing. Well, sometimes it can be, but not in general. So original experiences. In Genesis 1, the first account, so the 7 days, we hear God's creative voice. And we see this rich tapestry of creation. So just remember that passage on the day 1. And there's all that happened on day 1. And day 2, and then there's light and darkness, animals, and the order that it's in, right? But there's just this beautiful unfolding. God speaking and things happening. And then finally, God says, let us make man in our own image. And he made man. Male and female, he created them. And so there's this cadence that just builds up and builds up and builds up. And finally, on the sixth day, okay, we've arrived. And he's already, the very dialogue that God has within himself there, and then saying, let us create, and he has male and female, there's already, what John Paul II notices, an overture to the covenant that God wants to have with us. Covenant is an important word because when we finally look at sacrament, we're going to see the relationship between this covenant and the sacrament expressing that covenant. So there are lots of terms, but John Paul II is discovering these things along the way. Like he's not trying to start at the end. It's like, well, we know all of these things. He's trying to start here at the beginning, and of course with the knowledge he has. Okay, how do I discover from this experience that if I could go back in time and kind of examine in God's mind what's happening as an experience, what can I discover? Well, he's already noticing this. From the rich tapestry of creation, there comes this climactic moment where man and woman are created, but it's in the dialogue that God has within himself, and he says, let us make male and female. And then Genesis 2, the second account, and then we have the fall in chapter 3, we have man's response. There's a real highlighting of now this subjective experience. We start to see, John Paul II notices, it starts to reveal his interior world, his journey of wonderment. And there are three original experiences. We're going to look at solitude tonight. We're building up to that, so this is kind of like the intro. And then solitude will be the second half, basically, of our lecture. And then we had the original unity and original nakedness, which we'll see in following weeks. So the question that we asked before is, well, how can we access these original experiences? John Paul II says, well, we have echoes. I forget who used the image, but it was like if you put a glove on your hand and then carefully remove that glove and then just place it on the table, you don't have the hand, but you have kind of an echo or an image of the hand. So if I only had the glove and I came across this glove in the middle of somewhere, I would look at that and say, wow, I would just say, that's the experience we have now. Well, I can actually learn something through the imprint of what a hand is. So he says it's kind of like that. When we reflect that experience, our experience is kind of like the glove, our fallen experience. Well, if we look at the glove, we can get echoes of what was in that glove beforehand, if that makes sense. Like we have echoes. The original experience hasn't totally been eradicated. And one reason is, this image might help. The Silmarillion by Tolkien, he's talking about creation of Middle-earth or even before Middle-earth. So you don't have to be a Tolkien fan, but this is an image where at the beginning, there's the creator makes this melody. And Melkor, one of the creatures, one of type of angel, they're not called angels, but anyway, he puts a dissonant note into the melody. And instead of totally ruining the creator's melody, the creator then uses that as a hinge to make a new melody based on the dissonant note. So it's kind of a great image of how we had the original melody at one point, Adam and Eve before the fall. Discord comes in, dissonance, and then we have, you could almost say, it's not even true, it's variations on that original melody, bringing the discord somehow into a new, and redemption, the plan of redemption, right? But since the creator is the one who created both melodies, we can learn something about that original melody. So it's just another image to say, okay, we don't have direct knowledge of that experience, but if we look at our experiences, we can learn something about Adam and Eve and learn something about ourselves. Another they use, and the authors in Call to Love, removing the grime from St. Peter's. So before the Jubilee year in 2000, that was 500 years or 400 something years of soot and buildup on the facade of St. Peter's. And when they cleaned it for the Jubilee year, most people were like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize it was so white. It was just, there was so much grime built up over time. And when it was cleaned off, a similar thing happened in the Sistine Chapel. They cleaned the Sistine Chapel. You could look that up, Google that, what it looked like before they cleaned it, and then after, wow. So something like that. We have a lot of grime, but what's essentially true about us, there's something that still remains there. So they're analogies. They're not perfect because there's something even, I think, more intrinsic than just a painting and getting rid of the grime. Like there's some deeper goodness that we always bear within us. Or I'd say the child, like we mentioned last week a little bit, like you could hold up the child, little baby's body, and like we don't like, oh my gosh, hide that body. Like there's something, we still retain our innocence, even as children. Like there's something, there's goodness there. We can see it. So we have to listen to those echoes. Skipping through this is just a reflection on that. So that's kind of the idea. We have the echoes, let's listen to them, but we kind of need to be intentional as we journey on this, as we listen. We're going to have to know we're going to be purified. We're going to have to cross-reference things with the Word of God, those types of things. And it's only that last line, only an encounter with Christ within the church's memory and the wisdom from the church that we can really discover this original, even the current state we're in, but who we are truly called to be and who we are. So that first part there was just, we're looking at, John Paul II says, okay, here's our text, Jesus and the Pharisees. Can we divorce for any reason? In the beginning it was not so, because God created male and female. From that, John Paul II says, okay, very interesting point, Jesus. We want to know what in the beginning looks like. Okay, so this section I've just described is John Paul II reflecting, well, can we know anything about in the beginning? So if that makes sense, what I've just described, it's, well, we can. There's an echo. And the echo tells us something about the original voice. Like even the echo, like, hello, hello, hello. Okay, hear it. Who said that? So it's going to be harder if we could just have direct knowledge and be like, oh, I get it. I have the experience. I know what it's like. So it's more work. But we can still know something about this. So now finally, our term, original solitude. So we had, remember, 3, original solitude, which we'll see tonight, original unity, and original nakedness. 3 original experiences. So there's a twofold context here that in Genesis 2:18, John Paul II notices and highlights this phrase. After God saying that all was good, in chapter 2, it says, it is not good that the man should be alone. I want to make him a helper similar to himself. There are lots of translations of that. Ezer connecto is the Hebrew. Ezer is a help. Connecto is someone similar. It's actually a very rich term. In all of Scripture, side note, Ezer, when it's used, except for this context, it's always in reference to God. Like, God is our helper. So any woman who says, like, I'm not the helper of man, like, the only other time that word's used is directly referencing God. So I think that's a pretty high bar and a high calling, actually. Woman, the helper of man. In fact, we're the ones that need the help, so thank you for helping us. So anyway, God says, it's not good. It is not good that man should be alone. Now, just a side note, the first man, Adam is the word, we call him Adam, but the Hebrew word is the Adam, this singular person, this being. It wasn't until the woman is created later that we have the distinction between Ish. It wasn't that this was an androgynous person in the beginning. It was a male, the first Adam. But then when woman is created, he understands something about himself, Ish and Isha. We'll see that with original unity more in detail, but it's just a side note. The solitude refers to this singular individual. And it can refer to man and woman, right? In each of us as individuals. And there are 2 meanings of solitude mentioned in the second account of Genesis. From our very nature, our humanity, which we'll look at in a moment, we're distinct from those things around us, animals, everything else that aren't people. And then also, we'll see more in detail with the distinction of male and female. There's a solitude. So let's look more at this solitude. It is not good that man should be alone. So man, it's very interesting. He's actually not alone. He's surrounded by a lot of things. Like if you think he's not just in this solitary, like one thing in the middle of darkness. I'm alone. Like, he's surrounded in a beautiful place, lots of animals. He gets the task of naming them. They come forward and horse, or whatever he said back then, I don't know how he came up with all the names, but he did. And he's like, I'm not a horse. So but somehow in this experience, he feels alone. Yet he's not totally alone. So what is that? How is it possible that he's having some experience within himself, and then God is saying it is not good for him to be alone? But at one level, he's not alone. Okay. OS, when you see that, it's original solitude. Just not referring to iPhones or anything like software. It's an essential human experience. And it's not a mere deficit that is subsequently filled out by the creation of woman. So that's important to keep in mind. And anyone who's been in a relationship or is in a relationship or is married, you'll realize, that other person can't complete me and fill me and fulfill every desire that I have in my heart. They can't. Newsflash, right? They never will. Doesn't mean you can't have happy marriages and that we don't need each other. But this original solitude being an essential part of who we are, it doesn't just mean there's a deficit, meaning somehow the other completes me as a person. Now, we're going to get to that again. Others are very important, and we do need others in order to grow and to fully be ourselves. But at the core of who we are, it's not referencing, God's not first saying, okay, I messed up, let's create something else. So let's look at some of the aspects. What is original solitude expresses man's special dignity, his special relationship with his Creator. John Paul II calls it, becomes a partner with the absolute. Man is the only living being on earth whom God addresses as a father addresses a son. But God doesn't address animals the way he addresses us. He loves as God only loves. He loves into being everything that is. From a rock, which you think, well, I don't love a rock. But it's like love pours out from his being. That's who he is. But it's with the human person, human beings, that he addresses us directly as a son or a daughter. A living relationship. A personal relationship. So let's kind of back up to Adam's experience. He's in the middle of all of this creation. He's looking around. He's in wonderment. And then we can all have this experience. We could go into a beautiful place and look around and be just captivated. And I think we've perhaps had that experience of discovering something about ourselves. And I'm skipping some of these because I'm repeating the idea or just paraphrasing them. So when man starts to look for his essence, John Paul II, he starts to notice certain things. His relationship to the earth, God giving the command, cultivate the ground. He sees that there's something about creation that's left unfinished. Like, okay, here it is, now you finish. The call to subdue and rule the earth is similar in 128, so it's not this domination of creation, but this task given to us to, be, in a sense, co-creators with me. So he's discovering that through this calling, this is part of who I am. Original happiness. He's placed by God in the Garden of Eden. A place of order, a place of beauty, a place full of fruit trees that he can eat from, man and woman. So again, remember, we're talking about the original solitude experience, meaning each individual in their solitude having this experience. So they discover a relationship with the earth, they discover this happiness, harmony, and they discover subjectivity. John Paul II, of course, is unfolding this a lot in greater detail than I am right now, so I'm just kind of telling you his conclusions. But he starts to notice that there's a subjective element. In other words, an I, or an I who's speaking to a thou, a me, a you. I speaking to another. That means I'm a subject. I have a subjective dimension. Like rocks are objects, they don't have any subjectivity. They don't have consciousness. They don't have the ability. And animals don't either, not in the same way at all. Like they can't. Just kind of look at how an animal and a cat relate. Like, it's like, all cats and, I meant to say dogs. All dogs and cats, like, no matter where you go, dogs and cats, where's that coming from? All dogs, when they see a dog across the sidewalk, they're like they go crazy. And they see some other animal, like a lizard, unless they want to eat it or something, like they don't react the same way. Like, it just, animals are kind of locked into their way of being, right? There's not a sense of, I'm before another. Human beings, we all recognize, I'm a subject. I have interiority. And as that awakens in Adam, and he looks around, he also knows his superiority. And that's kind of one of these words nowadays that we're like, no, we can't use that word. Well, it just means one thing has higher dignity or is above another. But no, we shouldn't be above another, if some people are thinking that. Well, I'm above a rock. I'm superior to the rock, right? So Adam is noticing, I am different. In fact, I'm the one naming these animals. And it seems, John Paul II is reflecting, it seems that in this process, if we were to kind of just sit there and watch the whole animal after animal coming forth and looking around, it's almost this test that God is putting to Adam, the man he created, to start to discover and have something awaken with him of like, I'm alone. And he starts to search for identity. Adam finds himself from the first moment of his existence before God in search of his own being. He starts to discover who he is by what he is not. We look at ourselves like he's not like the animals. I'm not like that. I'm not like that. But what if we could pause and say, Adam, tell me about your experience. It's almost like he'd say, yeah, so when I was naming those animals, something was stirring in me. And I started to realize, okay, they're great. In fact, some of them were pretty awesome. Like, if you've ridden on a horse, that was pretty cool. But then he's like, but there was something in me that's like, but I'm not like them. But what am I looking for? I think any human being that's breathing has had an experience like that where you're like, that's great, but, what? So something's awakening precisely through that experience. God created. It wasn't torture, but it's actually a way of God revealing through creation something about who we are. And it's precisely then through his experience in the body. Like literally Adam could have yeah, I look different than that. He's noticing, but why? Why do I look different? And why am I feeling this? And how come they don't seem to have the same problem I'm having? They're not existentially moping around. Not know if Adam was moping, but kind of that inner reflection. The monkey wasn't. I guess monkeys do stand like that sometimes, but they're not pondering it the same way we are. So self-knowledge goes hand in hand with the knowledge of the world, and this is interesting for us too. We could still have this experience in nature, things around us, through animals, to notice the goodness of those things, and at the same time let the goodness of those things and awaken the deeper longings that you have, a sense of also superiority and your mission that you've been given. Again, it's God's creation. So, subjectivity. I'll just skip this for now. There's just more reflection on that. We've already made the main point here is there's self-consciousness and ability to self-determination. Through the trees, when God gives the command, you may eat of any tree from the garden, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for the day you eat it you will die. Right there, we're going to look at dying in a second, and a little bit farther. He can choose. And he hasn't been given a blueprint of when God says cultivate the earth, he says, okay, do it this way, this way, this way, this way, this way, this way, and this way. He just says, go for it. Self-determination, we can actually choose things. That's important too. Side note of what's God's will? Well, we had a course last semester on discernment and all that. But part of God's will is hey, choose something. No, but I want you to tell me. Well, I'm telling you, choose something. No, but tell me. I did tell you. Now, sometimes, obviously, could tell us, no, this is a path. But in the bigger scheme of God's will, it's enjoy this creation. Of course, rightly so. Enjoy it in truth. But it's still, there's a lot of space. We're going to get to freedom as well a little farther along. So we have subjectivity and the covenant. We mentioned this already, that created in the image of God. In the first account, we have that phrase, let us create man in our likeness and image. God created man, and male and female, he created them. He's constituted as a person. If we're in the image and likeness of God, to be made in his image, well, he is a person. He's three persons, right? But so to be made in that image, nothing else is made in his image. Like that word, those two words that are used, it doesn't refer to anything else except the human person, the human being. And so if God's talking this way, John Paul II is already reflecting, well, then there's already a sense that man, from the beginning, is a partner, cultivate, go forth and multiply, of the absolute. He's in a relationship with him. He can consciously discern, but always in dependence to his creator. In fact, the tree, do not do this. You may do this and you may not do this. That means we're created in relationship with him, but with boundaries. And there's a dependence on him, which seems obvious, like I didn't create myself, right? So Adam is discovering these things, his encounter with creation, his sense of being alone, but also this, we learn later, actually, after the fall, when they fall, that it said God went through the garden walking at the eve of the day, which implies that he'd been doing that before. Like there was something, this real closeness with God from the beginning. How does the body fit into all this? I mentioned it briefly when I said, well, Adam simply notices, well, I'm different. I'm not going to read these long passages. I'm going to skip to the next just to highlight from Called to Love. I've already described this. I got ahead of myself. So it's Adam's discovery of his original solitude before God as he is encountering, tilling the earth. Something about he can even reflect as he's doing that. Okay, why am I thinking about this? No, I can be creative and I can do something different. And naming the animals that God brings before him. This experience of the body starts to, he realizes it's meaningful in this. He's in creation. We could say this term matter, like everything else. But yet he's noticing he's different. He's noticing precisely through that there's interiority, there's subjectivity. We had that simple example last time I said if I punched somebody, it's like, well, you punched me. No, I punched that thing on you. No, that's my arm. You punched me. There's a sense that my body belongs to me in some sense, right? That's one of the phrases that can be used. Well, this is my body and I can do whatever I want with it. Well, you're concluding something there's something in between there you have to kind of verify. Is it true that I can do whatever I want with my body? Because it's mine. Whatever is mine, I can do whatever I want with. My body is mine, therefore I can do whatever I want with my body. That would be the syllogism. But it's not true that you can do whatever you want that's given to you. The body is not just, we talked about last time with senses of the body. It's not this just dumb stuff, right? It's not just some reductionistic view of what my body is. But we do notice, but it's this is my body. You're touching me. Oh, I'm touching myself, right? But I mean, if I touched any one of you, it's touching you, and how we respect people, how we greet people, how we have eye contact with people, all of those things, and how we don't touch people. You can say the body belongs to me in the instrumental sense, like I use my hand like a tool, like to pick up things. Intrinsic union, no distance between us and our bodies. Like, hey, show me where you are and like your body. There's no distance. Like, or point to your soul. Like here, really? Like you could equally point here and say, "There's my soul." Like it's everywhere, right? It permeates. So there's no distance. Like there's not this physical space between, like, lump of mass and soul. Like, no, you are your body. And I'll skip that last phrase, just because it was complicated. I'm just going to pause for a moment to highlight the key point I want to. The last part, the last phrase there, we start to discover, it's my body is personal. And then the last, that we're not an island. We're open to the world outside of us, just like Adam seeing everything around him. And we start to discover that a relationship with the outside world, what happens through my body. And I'm not alone. But we're going to get to that. But it's not good to be alone. And we also discover the body as a home, the habitat where human life is transmitted and nurtured, the dwelling place where I can receive other people. And a simple, the very clear way is a woman's body is definitely where human life is transmitted and nurtured. But in all other aspects too, how we can embrace somebody, you can welcome people, like that sense of your body. That's your body, like welcoming another body in an embrace, and how that can transmit love. How can that transmit? You can communicate with another person in that way, or the soothing effect that happens through, all sorts of manners of touching, or the way we can touch animals or something and have a sense of cuddling with a little kitten or something. All those things, it's showing, if we jump all the seconds just simply reflecting on, okay, let's not just take that for granted. Let's pause and actually reflect. What does that mean about my body? Angels can't have that experience. Angels don't have bodies. They're not bodies. They're spirits. So they don't know what it's like. They don't have this experience to say, can you just let me pet a dog? They can't. I can't pet that thing. They don't have a hand. They can't pet it, right? They have no body. Now, there have been times when there's a manifestation where an angel can appear like he has a body. Okay, we're going to bracket that for a second. But angels, they're angelic spirits. They're spirits. Which is really significant. When the Word became flesh, God has a human experience after that moment. As a man, he experiences, as a man, all the things he experienced. He didn't experience that before the incarnation. As a man, he's infinite. There's something about that physical contact that awakens something within us, that helps us know I'm alive, because we are body and soul. It's not just this, if I could only get rid of this, painful body. Yeah, we have that. We'll get to that. But it doesn't mean that I'm not my body. Receptivity, I'm going to skip that. And then identity. I'm going to highlight this point. In the sense of identity, we've already mentioned that point of our subjectivity, and we start to know more and more who we are. We also start to know that we're not our own origin. We saw the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And God says, when you eat of it, you will surely die. Now, John Paul II wonders, could Adam have even known what that meant? Die? What does that mean? But there's already mention, right in that, it's our body itself and that experience of the physical world, it helps him realize I'm not an origin into myself. In death, somehow, that word of something new could be, something could be taken away, I suppose. Life could be withdrawn. It confirms that we're limited. Again, John Paul II elaborates a lot more on this, so I'm trying to just summarize. So John Paul II, looking at these things, is discovering, just to recap real quick, our body in the experience of the world, tilling the soil, naming the animals, starts to awaken this sense of, okay, I'm different. I start to also have a sense of, I have an interiority. In the relationship with God, the Creator, and however that dialogue took place, man before him realizes, I'm in partnership with this one who's given me a commandment towards the world around me. And he's also mentioned then there's a possibility I have to do certain things, and we're going to get to freedom in the next slide. I can, and I do this, and I can't do that. And if I do the thing I can't, there's going to be a consequence of this thing called death. We're not our own origin, and we don't pave our own path. We don't just, okay, I'm here now, I'm going to do whatever I want. Because from the beginning, it's not so, and it's never so, actually. But we have a tendency to feel a bit of rebellion. It's I don't want it to be that way. But in the beginning it was, this is the plan of love. I've always used a simple example of like you could take a Ferrari off-road, but I mean, I guess you're free to do that, but you're not going to really enjoy the ride. And the Ferrari is going to be like, I'm not made for this. Like those car commercials, you're seeing these like driving these fancy sport cars over like sand. I'm like, I don't think so. Like the new Audi A6, and you're driving across the beach or something. I don't think that's like freedom. You're made a certain way, and to abide by certain things. So freedom and the body. Freedom, as we've seen in other contexts, is often thought of as freedom as just to be without restrictions. That's what it means to be free. Don't restrict me. Well, that phrase would be restrictive, so I guess you got to get rid of that. But freedom, well, that's the claim, but in order to be free, we need to get rid of all limitations of space and time that our bodies inevitably place on us. And the more we can do that, the more I'll be free. But if you just analyze a little bit of that playing itself out, culture will then contradict itself. A simple thing when we get to the sexual difference and all that, and the gender, it's just the idea, the same idea that proposes that our bodies don't really matter and we should do whatever we want with, is then the same ideology that will say, well, then we should therefore be able to have surgeries to change our bodies. But they don't matter. Why are we going to change them? You know, underneath all of that discourse, though, is this idea that I just need to be free of restrictions. But it's not working. So, well, is freedom something else then? The body, Benedict XVI says, is the region of freedom. If we can use analogies, the musician, physical laws of sound and harmony and notes, they're not restrictive. They're actually the means to making music. The sculptor, he conforms to the medium given. Michelangelo was a master sculptor and painter too, but sculptor of marble. He respected the stone given to him. He says, no, I want to do something different with this. And like, whoa, darn, I broke off the arm. Like he had to respect the nature of marble. And that was freedom. He was free to do what he wanted to the marble. But within respecting the tools he had, respecting the hardness of that material, respecting that imperfection, all of those things. And he actually exercised his freedom in that. If it was without any restrictions at all, we would never have the pietà. Like, you just wouldn't have it. You would have freedom. What does that mean? I have nothing. He wouldn't have anything. Creative freedom communicates beauty. The body is like a person's expressive medium. So when we look at those analogies of our body and freedom, it's the context in which we exercise freedom, but within limits. That doesn't mean we're not free. It just means that's the region of freedom. Just like the sculptor, the marble is the region of that freedom. It's almost like, I guess, if the sculptor itself could think, it would be, okay, I'm free to become the pietà. Why? Well, because I'm letting myself be acted upon, or that type of thing. Ourselves, the same way. We have to, the deeper understanding we have of ourselves, we have to always understand that the freedom is lived out throughout our bodies. It's the ability to be open to the world. I guess a simple thing is, too, that the freedom to smile at someone. Like, that happens through your body. Like, that's an expression of yourself towards another. Again, angels can't smile. Right? So it's all this to say we're human beings, that's our context, and when we express our lives and everything we do through the body. And then I'm going to skip these. There's the assignment to tasks to work, which is a big theme, and then work as liturgy, which I'll skip. And then I want to just sum up, and then I'll take questions. So that might have been, a little bit all over the place. I mean, I was following an outline. But if you're kind of like, I'm not sure what all that was. The main takeaways, again, remember what I said? Doesn't matter. You don't have to go away from here. It's like, okay, I just got a perfect outline of exactly what we're talking about. Because again, John Paul II's method is not linear. Like, okay, I'm just going to go from the top down to the bottom, and then you're going to have it clear. He's going to look at an experience, go into that. Okay, what do the words of Christ say to us? What can I learn? Now that I've learned that, what more can I learn from that? So if that's kind of, again, if you're getting dizzy by that method, it's okay. because you're not used to it, but that's fine. And it doesn't have to be your method. But I'm trying to follow what he's doing. And if you're kind of feeling like you're getting lost along the way, don't worry, themes will come back. So what we saw today was there were gaps there because I wasn't able to draw all the connections. But John Paul II, as he's unfolding this experience of Adam through the Genesis accounts, he's noticing that, okay, when we're before creation, precisely in our bodies, we're noticing that I'm in a place that's beautiful. I'm before things that are also beautiful, but then I start to discover they're not like me because I can see they're not like me. And that's starting to awaken something within me. A desire, you could even say, for another. And that's when he's talking about original solitude is this. Ultimately, it's well, we'll have the summary here. I think it's on the next slide, so I'll say it now and then you'll see it on the last slide. It's the partner with the absolute. Like at the very core of that very deep experience of Adam in the beginning and every human person is that I am first alone with God. And again, it's through the experience of everything we've mentioned. Something's an awakening, and he's realizing there's one who's put me here. We don't know exactly, like when God was walking through the garden, there was a relationship right from the beginning, a dialogue between God and man. That experience right there is original solitude, and we all are called to that. Every time we go into prayer and we're like, okay, I need to be alone with God. It's funny, we even say that. I go to be alone with God. Well, you're not alone, you're with God. But we still use that phrase, I want to be alone with God. Like that's your original solitude, like the deepest sense, like I am at my deepest core with God. But it's already relational. You're never this isolated entity that exists apart from everything else. It just doesn't, that's not who you are. John Paul II is reflecting on that happened precisely through the experience in the body, in the created world. So that's pretty amazing mind of John Paul II's capacity to kind of reflect and kind of break down perhaps the experience we all have, because we don't, it happens probably like that, but he just kind of very slowly goes through, okay, well, what's happening there? So glorify, this is the last two slides just to summarize. Glorify God in your body, says 1 Corinthians. The body is a vehicle of manifesting glory. Actually, I'm just going to go to the last slide because I didn't talk a lot about this. I'll only mention the last piece. We skipped some of the slides on work and liturgy, work as liturgy. And we're going to see this again. The last phrase is important. We're going to see especially when we talk about marriage. The body has a language. The body is meaningful even before we perform any special gestures with it, for it is the very grammar of the original experiences that define our humanity. Smile, simple language. Well, how does body have a language? We all know there's body language, but the simple is like, okay, some of you are sleepy. That's body language, right? Like, and some of you are happy. Some of you, like just all sorts of things we pick up. The body has a language. Even before I have to say anything or do anything special, the body itself, before I even move my hand, the body itself, what you see, expresses something. And then we're going to see the male and female difference expresses something. Before you have to, if somebody's thinking, well, let me do something to express something. No, you just, as a human being, your body expresses something. It says something. It has a language. But it's not like written there, like, well, it is written there, but I mean, it's not like English words, like, oh, that's what it means. So John Paul II is going to say, well, let's discover what is the body saying. The first thing it's saying is original solitude. Precisely because I'm not like these things around me, but yet I have this deep longing for intimacy. It's revealing something about myself. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? It's through the absence. It's through the not being like the experience in the body that I come to realize I'm made for another. Like if that wasn't already in me, written in me, and it would never have been awoken. So that's the first thing John Paul II is noticing. It's like, well, it's precisely in the created world around me, something has been aroused within me. Again, just Point to the difference between you and an animal. Animals don't have that experience. They don't go around dating and this and that. I mean, they just don't have relationships and figuring out and conversations and that. They don't do that. But they see all the same things we see. And then if they don't, they just get bored. A dog eats, it looks at you and plays for a little while, and then it goes to sleep. That's what animals do. Birds gather the food, go back and feed, they build their nest, then they just sit there. And squirrels, they feed in the morning, they go back up, and where are they the rest of the day? They're sitting in their nest. Yeah, they're in your yard, like eating the birdseed. It's like, you're not birds, stop eating the birdseed. Right, so I'm just trying to elaborate a little bit on that. That's what the experience John Paul II is noticing. The animals don't have that experience, but yet, by me looking at the world around me, the world I've been put in, that's beautiful and created by God, that he's asked me to cultivate, that he's asked me to name the animals, it's evoked something in me. Yet I'm alone, but yet I'm with another. The most basic thing about us is that original solitude. And then we're leading up to then, God says, it is not good that man should be alone. Let me create a helper fit for him. And that's what we'll look at next week. So Adam is aware that he is with, but unlike and therefore above the animals, he knows he's alone and understands himself as a subject and a person, everything I just said, and he's a partner with the absolute. And then the possibility of death helps him see that he depends on God. We could say, do not eat of this tree. There's something that immediately says, oh, do not. Okay, I am submitting to another. I'm also dependent on him. So those are highlights. That last phrase would be kind of key highlights. I'm with, but unlike. Something has awakened in me to know I'm a subject, and I'm called to be a partner with the absolute first, and then one like me, but always within the context of this last thing. I am dependent on the one who's created me. So that's original solitude in a 1-hour nutshell.